The defense for slavery we can find in many areas of life. I mean, you had people who were defending slavery for economic reasons, religious reasons, political reasons, and we could see it expressed, through mediums like magazines, literature, the Bible. Some people use it in that context. You could see it in science later on. Towards the end of the 19th century, you'll have individuals argue that some races were stronger than others. And nonetheless, you had some people that would make an even philosophical attempt to explain the notion of slavery in that where in existence do we have equality? Like where in nature does equality exist? If you venture off into an ocean, there's going to be inequality. There are animals out there that are, or there are fish that are out there that are stronger, some faster, some smarter than others, and they find ways to adjust and live in that environment. Um, and so what we find out is, you can have people argue that inequality is everywhere. In the Serengeti or in the jungles, animals will have to learn to adjust, adapt in order to survive. Failure to do so could result in losing your life, harm. There is a order of dominance between animals, and we can see this, especially, and people make the argument, well, yeah, well, humans are higher thinking individuals and blah blah this and blah blah that, and yeah, that's true. But even in that case, you could still see a sense of hierarchy in which the inferior submits to the superior. And for many racist individuals, they would argue that the inferior submitting to the superior would be just like blacks submitting to whites, females submitting to males, lower class individuals based on economy submitting to upper class individuals of economy. The idea that, well, because I make more money than you, I obviously must be better than you. I must have a higher IQ than you, or things of that nature. But this would be a fundamental law of human existence that because we could observe it in our everyday society, it must make sense. It must be natural. This notion of a superior and an inferior. And in my class, I tend to make fun or poke at the idea of dogs and how we all know people who own dogs in the United States. You may be a dog owner in of itself, and if I were to ask, and we all understand that dogs are animals, and most people will say yes, and then we can all understand that there are different breeds of dogs, and there are various characteristics by that breed. For example, there's going to be I don't know, there are Chihuahuas. Those are types of dogs. And then there's the white Chihuahua. There's a brown Chihuahua, long-haired Chihuahua. There are various types of labs, various types of pit bulls. But as a species, they are all canine. They are animals. They are dogs. But they're different types. And you can make an argument, well, are some dogs faster than other dogs? Just ask anybody, and they'll tell you what. Yeah, of course they are. Okay, or are some dogs stronger than other dogs? Duh, like everyone's raising their hand. Yeah, of course they are. Of course they are. Okay, cool. Are some dogs smarter than other dogs? And then and a lot of people, yeah, 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 my dog is smart. Pickles is the best. Yeah, okay, great. Um, so what we're getting at is we're observing an animal, a species, and then we also have different breeds within that species. And we begin to also notice that based on a particular breed, there are attributes or characteristics that would make one inferior or superior in certain areas of existence. And if we can do that for dogs, why can't we do that for humans? Like humans are an animal. Humans belong to a species or are a species. And there are different breeds of humans, right? And this is all by uh, man-made designation, but we wouldn't call them breeds because heaven forbid we align ourselves with the way we identify animals. But our breeds could be predicated upon race, black, white, and Hispanic, Asian, what have you. And then, if that also be the case, can you make an argument, because it's so easy to observe those differences in strength and intelligence and speed? Would we not be able to do that with, are some races faster than other races? Are some races stronger than other races? Are some races more intelligent than other races? And when you start to have those questions, then all of a sudden we start to get, no, no, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. No, that's not, where are we taking this? And where we're taking this is, if it's easy to apply those parameters in this area, could it be possible that they should be applied across the board to other animals, because we are all animals? And of course, everything that I'm saying at this moment may make a lot of sense. Like, we do some. I think, as far as some racial groups are stronger than others. Some racial groups are smarter than others. You can have those thoughts for sure. My point in saying all of this is not to bring any validity to any of that. And here's another thing, that just because it exists in nature doesn't mean that we do not constantly defy nature. Nature doesn't afford us the ability to fly, but we as a species, we as human beings have figured out ways to fly. We were not designed by nature to travel at various speeds, but we have figured out ways to travel at those speeds. So, like, we are constantly defining nature. So that's one thing. Secondly, all I was doing was making a simple parallel, an analogy of sorts, where if I could provide just a small slither of, well, it makes sense. If I could provide that in a convincing manner, that was a bit comical, to kind of ease the subject. If I could get you to think just for a slight second that, that does kind of make sense, then my job is done. I'll leave and let it marinate and let it marinate and let it marinate, and it'll take care of itself. And so when you have individuals that have the ability to articulate arguments like that, you could find yourself justifying the most wildest of explanations, such as the idea that black people are inferior and are more designed by God to be enslaved. So people can create a weird world if you allow them to. And on this institution of slavery, people wanted it to exist for a multitude of reasons, and we were finding justifications all over the place, whether they were valid, and of course, none of them really being valid, but they confirm their initial bias towards the end goal for them. I need this slave for economic reasons. I need this slave for political reasons. I need this slave for social reasons, physical reasons, and so forth and so forth and so forth. Now, on the next slide, I want to talk about slavery and the law. There were many laws passed since the start of slavery coming to the colonies, restricting them. We discussed the Virginia Law of 1662, in reference to slavery now being inheritable. There have been laws like the Negro Acts of the 1740s, which didn't allow slaves to congregate in fear of them going on some type of rebellion. That there were laws passed in which slaves had to carry papers. There were laws that identified slaves as property. Laws passed in the 1830s that made it illegal to teach slaves how to read and write because of various rebellions and riots that were taking place. African American or slaves couldn't testify in court against a white person, so the assault, physical, sexual, mental assault that would take place against slaves could never be argued in court. They were forced to sign contracts. They weren't allowed to acquire property. They couldn't own firearms. And again, the whole notion of congregating, that was always problematic, even in a religious sense. Much of the black church was often referred to as the invisible institution, in that it existed, but it wasn't allowed to exist in a formal sense. In this situation here, we have the case of Celia. In the readings, you'll find more information about that, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and move on. Now, at this time, I want you guys to underline fugitive slaves. And what I want us to take away from this is, we understand what a slave is, and then let us try to understand what a fugitive is. A fugitive is an individual that's on the run from a particular crime. Now, in this case, the crime itself is running away from slavery. And that was one option or avenue for slaves to be free, or in order to be free. The most infamous trek for runaway slaves would probably take place on the Underground Railroad, which is not underground and it's not a real railroad, but it's a phrase usually to describe, or euphemism, or it's synonymous with the idea that it would be a series or a network of safe houses that slaves could identify, hide out in, and then receive information on where to go next. And because a safe house would constantly have to change every 2 weeks or so, you would be changing a safe house. The safe houses would be identified with a candle in the windowsill. And the idea behind all of this was that they would slowly work their way up as far north as they could, past that Mason-Dixon line, into what they would see as freedom. Now, this was a very arduous journey. Slaves had little or no knowledge of geography, so this whole notion of, hey, go north and then hook a left at the miller's house, and then you'll go about 10 miles west of, they're not going to understand any of that. So a lot of times, because there were geographical barriers or knowledge barriers, the argument was simply, hey, man, you see that star right there? That's the North Star. That means if it gets brighter, it means you're going closer north. So just keep following that until it gets super, super bright. You could also have people say, you need to go north until the type of English they're speaking, you don't understand it, or the type of English they're speaking isn't even English. And so the argument behind that was that the Southern dialect was different from a Northern Yankee dialect, a Northern dialect. And then, of course, you could go so far north, you're no longer even in the United States, you're in Canada, where in some parts they're speaking French. Mostly men would be taking this journey. They would be in front of their wife and their children and let them know that they were going to go out because it was going to be dangerous, and not sure if he could come back, but he would be able to work and get money and use that money to come back and buy the whole family out of slavery. Yay! Okay, that probably never, ever happened. This isn't Django Unchained where he's going to come back and seek vengeance and things of that nature. I mean, the idea, first off, of a runaway slave finding themselves up north and then having a well-to-do life as a first-generation freedman by way of running away. I mean, that was very unlikely. The job market was still weak. People were really not that inclined to hire black laborers, but they existed. But I mean, again, there wasn't a lot of opportunity available, and racism was still rampant. So even if they did find work, they never found work that was worthy of saving and ultimately in their lifetime coming back and rescuing a family. And even if they did, it would be suspicious because he comes back and it's like, wait a minute, you were my slave. You were once property, and they could probably get re-enslaved. You never know. So they would tell the wife. The wife knew better. He was probably never coming back. The children will grow up or wishing and missing their dad, and always thinking that was out there, and he's making money to come get me. I know my dad's going to come get me. And when they get to an age where they realize their dad is not coming to get them, they decide to take on that venture to go find their dad. Again, leaving the mom alone in a very fragile state, and hardly ever a secure state, not a state that anybody would ever would want to be in. And now they're off. And it's this vicious cycle of the family breaking down because they all are in pursuit of what has been denied them, which is freedom. When we look at people crossing that Mason-Dixon line, to them, that was, there could be a parallel that one could make an argument that for many Latin Americans, people in Central America, South America, if they had an opportunity to cross the American border, man, life could be so much different for them in their lifetime, but maybe not even in their lifetime, for their children's generation or their children's children's generation. And we all know somebody who, for them, that is a reality, especially because we're down south, we live in Texas. We probably ran across somebody whose parents or grandparents, or maybe even them themselves, made that trek, and their life has been better for it. More often than not, better for it. Um, it's not a pretty concept, but people are fleeing and seeking refuge. They're fleeing a situation that they had growing up into, probably had no control over, and making the most of what they can. And not everything is as sweet as it is for people who live in the United States. So coming here in that capacity. Now we can also make this, and this was interesting. We have this illegal immigration argument. Well, if maybe if they just did it the legal way. Well, I mean, obviously, those legal avenues are incredibly difficult, almost impossible, considering the amount of people that are struggling. It doesn't seem realistic. And so they are fugitives as well, because they too are now, in essence, breaking the law. Um, Individuals crossing the border illegally, or slaves crossing over the Mason-Dixon line, that's an illegality. That's illegal as well. But we don't tend to have the same attitude towards runaway slaves, at least in today's context or in today's time. We have the luxury of looking back at slavery and saying, "Oh, well, wow, they were heroes. They Harriet Tubman running away from slavery." Like, well, those guys were breaking the law too. And these individuals, we can make an argument, yeah, they're breaking the law too. They're coming into the country illegally. And there are definitely some issues that have to be addressed regarding our immigration system and immigration reform at large, because it is apparent that there's some loopholes and problems that still need to be addressed. At this time, I want you guys to underline Nat Turner's Rebellion. Go ahead and underline that right here. Now, Nat Turner was a slave preacher. So that means that he had the ability to um, appeal to a congregation, a group of individuals that would listen to his explanation of Scripture. And uh, after a while, and after many experiences, he ultimately just comes to this conclusion that he needs to take his congregation, and they need to gather weapons and kill as many people as they can in order to obtain their freedom. Or more or less, just, if people get in their way to obtain freedom, they shouldn't hesitate to use violence. So in August of 1831, um, Nat Turner starts this revolution, this rebellion, this insurrection, and they're killing everybody they see on site that could be white, because then they are part of the problem. He ultimately ends up killing 60. When I say he, his group of individuals ultimately end up killing about 60 men, women, and children. And many of the um, slaves are going to be caught, and Nat Turner will eventually be caught. He will be tried for crimes, his crimes, including murder, of course. Other individuals are going to be hung. Um, but before they do all of this, what the slaves begin to realize, and what society in the South begins to question, is, why are slaves acting like this? Why are they trying to run away? And then it just goes to show that these Southerners just didn't get how vicious and vile the institution of slavery was for many, and that slaves were now willing to take up arms. Slaves were now willing to kill, and this will be a very large scale rebellion that will result in many laws being passed as a response. Um, but one caveat I want to take away from Nat Turner's rebellion is not the depth of um, murder, or the depth or of one's desire to be free, but the reality of numbers. And when we look at Nat Turner's rebellion, we see that even when armed, they simply do not have the numbers or the suasion to convince America that slavery needs to be abolished. That only an outside force could alter this balance within America. Slaves alone were probably not going to be able to eliminate slavery in America. They represented too small of a percentage of our population, and that unless we got a great deal of America on board to assist in this situation, we were never going to solve the problem of slavery in America, this peculiar institution. And these group of individuals that I'm speaking of are called abolitionists. These are individuals that are against the institution of slavery. They want it to be abolished, and we will be discussing a great deal of these individuals in our next chapter.